Namaste. A very good afternoon to you, all of my viewers. I hope all of you are staying safe and taking very good care of yourself and your families. Now, those of you who are joining me for the first time today, the way we hold it is that I'm going to speak for the first 10 and 15 minutes, and thereafter, I'm going to take questions from you, and I'll try to answer as many as I possibly can to the best of my ability. The topic that we chose today for a discussion with all of you is the philosophy of communication. And therefore, the first thing that we need to understand is what is communication? If you look at the root of communication, it comes from the word communicare. Etymologically, Latin root is communis, which means to share or to make common. Now, what is it that you share? Communication is defined as exchange of messages. And it is defined as a process of encoding and decoding. So, what the theory says is that there is a sender who encodes the message, whatever he or she has in his or her head, and then using a medium sends it to the receiver who then decodes the message. Now, the problem is that the way the sender has encoded the message may not be necessarily the same way in which the receiver decodes the message. And therefore, what we need to find out is what goes into this software of encoding and decoding. And you'll be surprised that the answer comes from the Rigveda. Rigveda has actually defined communication. The Sanskrit word for communication is sampreshana. And what the Rigveda says is, Samani va akuti, samana hridayani va, samanamastu vo manah, yatha vasu sahasati. What it says is, there are three entities which participate in communication. Hriday, man, buddhi. Heart, mind, and intellect. Now, what originates in the heart? Feelings, emotions. Of course, you can point a finger at me and say, hey, emotions originate in the limbic system, which is next to the hypothalamus. Correct. Metaphorically, what we say is that emotions originate in the heart. And what is the difference between mind and intellect? Mind is the seat of desire, and intellect is the seat of judgment. So please note, intellect is the seat of judgment, mind is the seat of desire, and heart is the seat of emotion. Now, whatever happens in the intellect, in the process of communication, gets manifested through words. Whatever happens in the mind, in the process of communication, gets manifested through body language. And whatever happens in the heart, in the process of communication, gets manifested through facial expressions and tone and tenor of the voice. And therefore, what the Rigveda says is when the heart, mind, and intellect of the receiver become the same as that of the sender, then communication has happened. Samani vakuti, samana hridayaniva, samanamastu vomana. Therefore, it's a complicated thing. Because for this to happen, first of all, you should be saying the same thing with your heart, mind, and intellect. For example, while talking to you, I say, hey, I never get angry. My words are, I never get angry. Clearly, my body language is that of anger. And therefore, some pressure cannot happen. Because I'm not saying the same thing with my heart, mind, and intellect. So remember, the first philosophy of communication is that you have to ensure the heart, mind, and body of the receiver becomes the same as that of the sender. And for that to happen as a sender, you must make sure that you're saying the same thing with your heart, mind, and intellect. The second philosophy of communication. More often than not, we focus on the sender side, which means we try to focus on our strengths during the communication. That idea. Why? Because what is more important is how is the receiver going to receive it. So, for example, let's say I speak good English. If I speak to you in such amazing English that every sentence of mine sends you scurrying to the dictionary, what's going to happen? Will there be any communication? No. Why? Because nothing is being received. And therefore, don't try to build on your strength, find out the audience and do the audience analysis and find out what is it that your receiver will find easy to understand. Never ever equate the command over the language as adroitness in communication. You don't need to know a language very, very well. You don't need to have a command over English very, very well to be able to communicate very good, to be able to communicate very effectively. Of course, it's a bonus, it's a plus if you also know the language very well. But please remember, it all depends on the receiver. Is the receiver actually getting whatever it is that you're trying to communicate? So this was the second philosophy. The third philosophy, the choice of the channel. What is that medium that you are using to actually communicate to the other people? Please remember there is something called channel richness. There are some channels which have a low level of richness, and there are some channels which have a high level of richness. The highest level of richness is a face to face conversation, the same physical space. Thereafter, you have a video conferencing, something like this, where you can see me. But the best would be if I can also see you. So, something like the way we do the webinars or the way we do meetings on the different platforms, etc. Thereafter, you have audio. If you can actually create some kind of a tape, audio tape, and send it to the people, your receivers. Thereafter, you have emails, memos, etc., etc. So please remember, high richness channel is face-to-face video conferencing. Low richness channels are a poster on the wall, or some kind of a notice on the wall, some kind of a notice on the board, or an email. Now, what you have to understand is that non-routine messages, you must use a channel which is high in richness for all non-routine messages. For example, a non-routine message would be a very significant change in the policy of your organization. Or if you are firing somebody, if you're asking somebody to quit. Now, those are non-routine events, and therefore you must ensure that you're using a high richness channel over there. All routine messages. For example, if you want to give updates to the people, or for example, you need to give some kind of an information to the people, for them, you can actually use, and for those situations, you can actually use channels with low richness, like just a notice or perhaps an email. So the choice of channel becomes extremely important depending on whether the message that you're going to send or planning to send is routine or non-routine. The fourth philosophy of communication is that what you need to understand is that people understand things in very, very different ways, which means there's something called context. There was a researcher called Hall. He did a lot of research on different cultures. And what he found out was that there are cultures with a low context culture, and there are countries with a high context culture. So please note, these are dichotomous dimensions of culture. Now, low context cultures are those whose people listen very carefully. They don't look much at the body language, and they take the meanings of the words literally. Examples of low context cultures would be US, Germany, the Scandinavian countries, Norway, Denmark, Sweden, Finland. And then you have the high context cultures. People from high context cultures don't listen, look more at the body language of the other person, and they try to read between the lines. They don't even take the meanings of the words literally, but they try to read what is the person really trying to say beyond the words. Examples of high context culture: Japan, Indonesia, Middle East, and of course, India. And therefore, you must make sure that whenever you're talking and whenever you're doing an audience analysis, make sure, try and find out what kind of a context culture does the other person come from. Because if the other person comes from a high context culture, he or she is perhaps not listening to you, but watching you very, very carefully, observing you, and trying to read between the lines and beyond the words that you're speaking. Whereas if you're speaking to a person who comes from a low context culture, the person is listening to you very, very carefully and taking the meanings of your words very, very literally. And thus, this context becomes extremely important. And finally, there's a dictionary term as well, which is called context. Context is also a regular word that we use in English. Now, what it means is that while communicating, please note that the meaning of your words is going to actually change depending on the context in which those words are uttered. For example, my favorite example are these four words: the door is open. So let's say I take a session with people. After my session, a lot of people come to me and say, "Hey, Himanshu, that was great. We would want to do some research and communication. Would you be willing to do some research with us?" And I say, "Hey, the door is open." Another bunch comes to me and says, "Ah, what a waste of time. Whatever you spoke was completely useless." And I say, "Hey, the door is open." Or somebody says, "Himanshu, there is a draft of cold air coming from somewhere." And I say, "Hey, the door is open." Now, all three times I have said exactly the same thing. The door is open. Has the meaning changed? Clearly, the meaning has changed every time. In the first time where people came to me saying that they would want to work with me, the meaning was, "You're most welcome. Would love to work with you." The second time, when people come and tell me that whatever you have said is useless, and I say the door is open, it clearly means you could leave if you don't like whatever it is that I'm saying. And in the third time, when I say the door is open, it's a literal meaning, literally saying that the door is open. If you want the cold air not to come in, go and close the door. How many of us pay attention to the context? Not many. And therefore, you must remember that every time you say something, it will have a completely different meaning in the context in which it is said. I'll give you another example. I was training a bunch of executive directors of a very large public sector company. And when I came to this part, they said, Professor Himanshu, context really does not matter at our level. And I asked them, at your level, how do you communicate with your subordinates? They said, well, these days we have WhatsApp groups of all departments, so we send WhatsApp messages to each other. And then I asked them, hey, imagine a subordinate of yours sends you a WhatsApp message saying, going to the hospital will be late. How would you respond? You would scarcely believe it. All 30 of them, some or the other way, paraphrased in some or the other way, gave the same response. And that was sending a WhatsApp message back to the subordinate saying, what time can I expect you at the office? I told them, all right, now put yourself in that person's shoes. Imagine you are the one sending that WhatsApp message to your CEO saying, going to the hospital will be late. Now, nobody goes to the hospital for something insignificant. Nobody goes to the hospital to take a stroll. Go to the hospital for something important, good or bad. Something important. If your CEO writes back to you in a WhatsApp message saying, what time can you expect? What time can I expect you at the office? How would you feel? I said, थोड़ा सा insensitive हो जाएगा. I said, थोड़ा नहीं, बहुत insensitive हो जाएगा. And therefore, what you must remember is, had that context been that of market, had subordinate written to you saying, going to the market will be late, then your response saying, what time can I expect you at the office is appropriate. Because the context was that of a hospital, the same remark has become inappropriate and insensitive. And therefore, please note that context changes the meanings of the words completely so far as communication is concerned. Communication has a very deep rooted philosophy. And before we try to master the art of the semantics, before we try to master our body language, before we try to master what kind of a tone should we speak in, and I will take those sessions at some or the other point, what we need to understand are these basic philosophies of communication. All right? So I'm going to stop here. Now I'm going to look at the questions before I actually say anything beyond on this topic. So, good afternoon. I can see a lot of good afternoons. So, good afternoons. It's lovely to see you all here as well. How much sensitive does one need to become a good communicator? Ranti, it's a good question. You need to be extremely sensitive. What you need to have is actually something that I call reflective listening. You need to have sensitivity in actually understanding what the other person is going to say or what the other person is trying to say. More often than not, we tend to listen to respond. We tend to listen to respond, which means that if the other person is asking us a question, simultaneously we start thinking of how to give the other person a very witty answer or a very good answer. Please note that if you want to communicate as a leader, you have to listen to understand what the people are really going to say. And for that, you need to be very, very sensitive. You need to have very high levels of tolerance, and especially during the times of crisis. Remember, during the times of crisis, everybody is at an edge. As a leader, your communication abilities necessarily, necessarily they include abilities of having a very high tolerance and reflective listening. There'll be people who'll be saying things to you, who'll be calling out names to you, because anything that you do, especially during the time of a crisis, it is going to make some people unhappy. It is going to make some people angry. And what you have to understand is that even though the others may be angry, you have to be sensitive. You have to understand that these are the times when you need to show more maturity, when you need to show the largeness of the heart. And therefore, you must be more tolerant. Try to understand what is it that they're really trying to say. Don't respond to them immediately, because your response may just flare the anger up, may just make them more angry. Try to do things which is going to assuage or mitigate the situation that they find themselves in. And therefore, in that case, being sensitive and action oriented communication becomes extremely important. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Balance between heart and mind. Absolutely. So you need to have the balance between heart and mind in general in life, Sujit, so far as your life is concerned. When it comes to communication, what we are trying to say is that your heart betrays or shows your emotions on your face, in your tone. And when it comes to your mind betrays whatever is going on through in your head, through your body language. And therefore, you must make sure that your tone and your body language are in sync with the words that you speak. And that is the balance that we are talking about between the heart, mind, and intellect. Good afternoons. Good afternoons. I'm so thankful to you, Arvind, that you're enjoying my live session. Uh, as much as both of us enjoy mountaineering, this is something that I really love, talking to people, basically. Mind and heart start working in different directions. So mind and heart likely work in different directions at times, because there's always this conflict, this dichotomy between judgment and desire. In that case, I'm not saying that you need to actually listen to one of them. A lot of people are going to give you that advice: oh, just listen to your heart. Or, no, 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 try to control your heart by actually stabilizing your mind. What you need to do is to draw some kind of balance, because if you don't listen to your heart at all, you're going to miss out on the sensitivity part that Ranti was asking about. And if at all you don't listen to your mind, and if you listen only to your heart, in that case, at times, your judgment may be erroneous. Now, the way you can actually bring about a balance between the two is, as I said, be sensitive, don't act in a hurry, and most importantly, don't react. Many a times when people are communicating to you, we tend to react to the people. Never ever react to people. Try to keep the conversation focused on the issue which is out there. And if you keep the conversation focused on the issue, you will be able to actually create some kind of a balance between your heart and the mind. Please remember, always separate the subject from the object. Always separate the person from the issue the person is talking about. And that ways you can actually maintain the balance very well. It's a pleasure talking to you. Just like you say that it's a pleasure to listen to me, it's lovely to see all of you over here. Richness. Channel richness is what I was talking about. What I meant was that certain channels are rich in terms of their efficiency and ability of communication, like face to face. Why? Because when I'm talking face to face with somebody, in that case, I can see the person's expressions, I can see the person's body language. And sometimes, as I said, the person may be saying something else in words, but body language may actually tell me what is the person really trying to say. So if I say, would you be able to do this job? And the person says, well, yeah. But by the tone, although he has said a yes, by the tone, I can make out that perhaps the person is not confident. Therefore, I need to figure out ways to help the person if I really want to get the job done. So that is what is meant by channel richness. And low channel richness would be something where it's a kind of an insulated environment, where you simply send an email or where you put a notice on the notice board and expect the persons to actually just understand. Thank you, Surjit. Good afternoons. High context and low context cultures, of course, I would explain it again. So, low context cultures are those cultures where people in those cultures, they tend to listen very carefully. They don't look much at the body language, and they take the meanings of your words literally. Examples of low context are US, Germany, Scandinavian countries, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Finland. High context cultures, on the other hand, they don't listen too much. They look more at the body language, and also they don't take the meanings of the words literally. They try to read between the lines. They try to go beyond what is being said. Examples of high context cultures are Japan, Indonesia, Middle East, and to a large extent, India. And therefore, when you're communicating cross culturally, people coming from a different culture, people coming from a different country, in that case, you must ensure that you put this context of the culture in place. So if you're talking to a person from the high context culture, make sure that your body language is being your body language is being observed. So make sure that your body language is in sync with what you're saying. If you're talking to a person of a low context culture, make sure that your words very, very clearly say whatever it is that you wish to. That is the difference between high context and low context. How can a student communicate in the best manner while writing answers in an exam? One of the things is a lot of the best way of doing this, Priya, is to make sure that you have understood the question very, very clearly. For example, when people come in a group discussion or when people are being interviewed and asked a question, many respondents tend to actually veer around the answer, which means that you create some kind of an introduction, you talk about some things which are on the periphery of whatever is being asked, and by the time you come to your point, you have already lost a lot of time, both in a group discussion or an interview, or, for example, an exam. Be to the point. To the point. And also note that you don't have to make many points in an exam, which is open ended kind of an exam. You have to make two, three very good points, ensuring that you're answering the question that you have actually been asked and that you have understood the question very well. Likewise, for example, if you're in a group discussion, make sure that you have understood the topic very, very well before you actually start speaking. And if you haven't understood the topic, make sure that you hold on till a couple of people have actually spoken. And then, by looking at what they are saying and by looking at how others are reacting to it, you will understand what other person is saying. Does it really make sense? Is it really on the topic or not? And thereafter, you can make your contribution. So, there are two things that are extremely important over here. One is your understanding of the exact question that is being asked, and two, being precise, being short, and making sure that you're not using too many words or you're not beating around the bush while answering the question. Thank you very much for those very kind words, Namita. The door is open. It's my favorite example. What is the difference between you are right and you are not wrong? When you say you are not wrong, you are still not sure. And there is an element of doubt in here. Because when you're saying you are right, then you're very, very sure that what the other person is saying, or at least this is what you're trying to convey to the other person, that the other person is right. Now, I can understand what is the background of which you have asked this question, Rajesh. How should we speak? How polite should you be? Satyam bruyat, satyam bruyat. The best way is if you can actually speak the truth in a very, very palatable way, in beautiful words. ऐसी वाणी बोलिए मन का आपा खोए औरन को शीतल करे आपहु शीतल होए. You don't have to speak the truth in a bitter way. And whenever you disagree with somebody, please note that you are disagreeing with what the person is saying. You are not disagreeing with the person. And that is why I keep saying separate the people from the issues. Always separate the people from the issues. And always make sure that, remember, whenever somebody has a perspective is a perspective. There is no such thing as a good perspective or a bad perspective. Perspective is a perspective. You may agree with the perspective and you may disagree with the perspective. So, whenever you are actually communicating your disagreement, make sure that you're telling the other person that not that you're a fool, you don't make sense, but you tell the other person that whatever you are saying, I'm sure you have a valid reason. However, I tend to think differently on this issue. So, can we also think on these lines? So, you don't have to really say that you are wrong, but you actually say whatever you are saying, there are alternative ways of looking at it. There are alternative perspectives of looking at it. Because remember, the moment you get personal, things will always become dysfunctional. Because the moment you become personal, the other person will start getting angry. And unless you have abnormal levels of patience, like I keep telling people, perhaps that's one of the strengths that I have, the abnormal levels of patience. It'll be very difficult for you to find a solution to a problem. The problem can be solved only if at least one of you has very high levels of tolerance. But of course, by all means, if a other person is getting abusive, make sure that you don't take toxicity beyond a point. Make sure that you remove such people from at least your life. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. A Damodar, a 10-year-old son, how can you make him communicate better? Well, as I said, that these are the basic philosophies. But if you're talking about also as to how to improve the content of one's communication, in that case, the answer is right behind me. Read, read, and read. And why? Because when you read, and if you have an eclectic kind of reading, which means you read on multiple topics and you read about multiple perspectives, in that case, you tend to have debates in your own head. You tend to have multiple perspectives. You tend to have those moments when you actually introspect and reflect because you get to know of other people's perspectives as well. So, the first and the foremost way of actually ensuring that you have good communication skills or your son has good communication skills is to read voraciously. Be a voracious reader. And the more you read, the more you talk to people. In one of my earlier talks, I said, talk to people who are different than you. Talk to people who have different interests. Because when you talk to those people, why do we talk about diversity in a classroom? Because when you get diverse ideas into a classroom, that is when inclusive decision making happens. Likewise, when you read diverse kinds of books, books with different perspectives, you meet diverse kinds of people, that is when you become sensitive to other people's points of views. You become sensitive to other perspectives. And then to Atma Chintan and Atma Manthan, introspection and reflection, you form a perspective which is more inclusive in nature. And the earlier you start asking your son or getting him interested into reading, the better it is. And the best way of doing it is have books all around the house. The way I got into reading was because that's all my parents had. So in all the rooms in our house, in the little house that we grew up in, my brother and I, we just had books all around. And even in this house of mine at I am Indore, in all my rooms, I just have books. And of course, I read them many times over. I also read a book many times over because every time you read a book again, and I'm talking, of course, about classics, you tend to have a different idea. You tend to have a different thought coming to you because every time you read a book, you have also grown as a human being. You have also experienced a few more things. And therefore, when you look at that book again, you are looking at it with an absolutely fresh pair of eyes. Oh, there are so many questions. I'm so sorry that I wouldn't be able to answer all. I'll just pick up probably one more. Oh, absolutely. Parul, a response is not necessary at all times. You don't have to respond to everything because many a times people ask you a rhetorical question, and rhetorical questions are not meant to be responded. So, more often than not, we feel this innate need to actually respond to everything that is being said. Now, imagine if you are in an administrative position and if you get hundreds and thousands of emails, you can't possibly respond to all of them, even if you want to. And therefore, you should pick up those which have a question in it. Many a times, for example, in several sessions of speakers, there are people who say that they want to ask a question, but actually they are making a statement. They're perhaps giving you a view on whatever you have spoken. And those things don't need a response because a response was not even expected by them. All right. Okay. So I'm going to stop here. I'm so sorry. I can see the number of questions which are in there. And obviously, communication is not something which can be covered in just a 30-minute discussion. I promise you that I'm going to have another discussion on this particular topic. But just to summarize, what we have discussed today is the philosophy of communication. I'll talk about the art of communication, where I'll take up how to improve your body language, how to improve your tone and tenor of the voice, etc., in some other session. Today, we have discussed the philosophy of communication, and the most important part of the philosophy, and this is what you should take away from today's session, is that you have to ensure the heart, mind, and intellect of the receiver in any communication that you give out have to become the same as the heart, mind, and intellect of the sender. Only then true and effective communication has happened. And to ensure that, you have to ensure that you are saying the same thing with your heart, mind, and intellect. So, thank you very much for joining me today. I hope that you all stay safe now that you have started. Some of you have started going to your workplace. Please take very good care of yourself. Please take very good care of your family. And please take very good care of those who are dependent on you. People from the disadvantaged sections who may not have the kind of facilities that we have. Make sure that you are helping them out. Thank you very much and see you next Saturday at 3 p.m. with a Hindi live show. Thank you.